Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, David Nabhan, talking about his latest book, Thinwalker. Welcome to another episode of The Worldshapers, the podcast where I talk to authors about their latest books. My name is Edward Willett. I am also an author. My latest novel is The Tangled Stars from Daw Books. That's came out a little over a year ago now, which you can find in both ebook and audiobook. And I'm also a publisher. Shadowpaw Press is my publishing company, and the latest thing from Shadowpaw Press, well, there's three, actually. There is The Good Soldier, a rollicking military science fiction satire by Nir Yaniv. There is Shapers of Worlds Volume 4, which is the fourth anthology I've kickstarted, featuring authors who were guests on this podcast in its fourth year. And there is The Headmasters by Mark Morton, which is a young adult dystopian science fiction novel that technically comes out tomorrow as I'm recording this, but it'll be out this week, and those are all available everywhere that you like to buy books. I did, of course, talk to Nir Yaniv 2 episodes ago, and I talked to Mark Morton last week. So if you'd like to know more about those books, you can check out those interviews. Shadowpaw Press has a very active year coming up. One of it's me and the cat. One of our big releases will be The Downloaded, which is the latest novel by Robert J. Sawyer, Canada's best-known science fiction writer. And concurrently with that, there'll be the last two books from the late, great Canadian science fiction and fantasy writer Dave Duncan, The Trader's Son and Corridor to Nightmare. They'll all come out in May. And then I have all sorts of other books already planned for the rest of the year. So if you're interested, please check out Shadowpaw Press at shadowpawpress.com. And you can check me out, if you'd like, at edwardwillett.com. All right, so let's get on to this episode's guest. I'll be talking to David Nabhan. Now, David is a science and science fiction writer who's been featured on the air or in print in a remarkable number of news outlets in the U.S. and elsewhere, television, radio, newspapers. The airtime and or column space has garnered some of the most recognized media venues in existence, many hundreds of times. CBS News, Popular Science, Inside Edition, RT Television, London Daily Mail, Thom Hartmann Show, UK's Naked Scientists, Howard Stern Show, it goes on and on. He's the author of 4 books concerning earthquakes, peer-reviewed papers on the subject, and many scores of newspaper and magazine op-eds regarding earthquakes, hydraulic fracking, dams and mining, climate issues, and other important topics, published on 3 continents and in 2 languages. We'll be talking about his novel Thinwalker, which is his second. His first, The Pilots of Borealis, came out from Skyhorse Publishing Talos Press back in 2015. So let's get on to our chat this time around with David Nabhan. So, David, welcome to the Worldshapers. Oh, I should take off my glasses so my eyes aren't all glittery. So, how are you?
Well, it's my pleasure to have a word with your audience. Thank you for having me.
Now, we have not met, so this is, I always look for connections. We've both done some science writing, but I think that's the only connection I could find. And you're in Pittsburgh, you said?
Right. I'm from Los Angeles, but recently a transfer to Pittsburgh. Beautiful city, great people. Terrible weather.
Well, I'm in Saskatchewan, so we won't talk about the weather. Although actually, we're having record warmth this week, a big January thaw, which is kind of nice. But maybe record warmth. It's up there anyway.
No, here.
After being minus 36 a couple of weeks ago, we can take it. So let's talk about, we're going to be talking specifically about your new book, Thinwalker, but let's back up a little bit and tell me about yourself and your writing journey and how you came to the point where you were writing novels.
Well, over the last quarter century, I've written 6 books, 3 in science, 3 science fiction, and maybe 300 or 400 op-eds, articles in. I'm a columnist for Newsmax and the Times of Israel and the California Business Journal. any topics that's controversial, where religion, science, and politics and culture meet.
All those things you're not supposed to talk about.
Those are, I've said something about it. Been pleased to be graciously welcomed by the media to have my say on things. So I've been very fortunate.
Well, where were you born and grew up, and how did you get started writing to begin with?
I'm a Texan, fourth generation. Moved to Los Angeles and became a teacher. Taught in South Central Los Angeles for 20 years. Was the earthquake preparedness coordinator for the Los Angeles Unified School District for 15 of those years, and got interested in the topic of seismic forecasting. My claim to fame, people probably, I'm no great science fiction writer, but in the world of seismic forecasting, I'm there's few of us, and I'm probably up there.
Well, and your website is actually earthquakepredictions.com. So
Earthquakepredictors.com, yes.
that's very cool. So let's. When did you start writing fiction? What? I mean, obviously you primarily a nonfiction writer, but what drew you into the world of fiction writing? Were you a big reader?
You know, I'm not a big fiction reader. I read mathematics, science, history, biographies, but sci-fi is I that's one of the genres where I've made an exception. It's because I'm so interested in science, and I'm curious how the world is going to progress in the next century, in the next millennia. And like with the earthquake prediction, for example, that was impossible since forever. And over the last few years now, that mantra has changed. And science fiction historically has led the well, not led the way, but more or less hand in hand with science. There's if you look back at all the great inventions that we enjoy right now in the modern world, almost all of them are written in science fiction. Going back to the first century, Lupin is the Roman writer who penned a fantastical voyage to the moon back in around Augustus's day. So science fiction has gotten my attention because I'm so interested in science and math and history.
What was your first uh, foray into the fiction world? What was your first book?
Pilots of Borealis by Skyhorse Publishing in New York, a story about a, a city on the moon in the 25th century. Thinwalker, though, takes it a bit further. That's 800 or 900 years into the future, 100 light years from Earth. So that was very difficult to try to imagine. Well, you could anybody could imagine how difficult that would be to put together a civilization that will be a millennia hence from now. So that was quite a task. It took me some while to get Thinwalker done.
Well, let's talk about that. And I guess the first place to start is with a bit more of a synopsis about the book, without giving away anything you don't want to give away. What is the story of Thinwalker?
Well, I hadn't planned this with the great pandemic catastrophe that we've all been going through over these last few years, but this actually turns out to be the granddaddy of all far future vaccination tales. It's a uh, it's it's how it's something. It's so difficult to imagine how we wish to hold back from the scientific nanotechnology, the vaccination, inoculations, and all the biomechanical things that are certainly in our future, how they may impinge on the human spirit is the downside, uh, and that's what the book tries to delve into. What will happen in the far future when biomechanism becomes very much a part of the human condition, and how it will affect philosophy, politics, and our history in the far future.
So, what is the story itself? I mean, there must be characters and a setting and a plot. What's an
Well,
overview of that?
For Canadians, the protagonist, they're going to eat him up like poutine. He's a Quebecois. He's a 25-year-old diehard Quebecois who simply will not give up the, the dream of Canada and the dream of his ancient ancestry, even though he's never been to Earth. And Canada in the far future, unfortunately, doesn't even exist, the nation, nor the USA. He lives, like I said, 100 light years from Earth, and he's part of a fringe group that is hanging on to their culture and hanging on to the old ways. You might consider him a Luddite of some sort, but
He
Canadians will
that
eat him up.
that far in the future, it's almost like Society for Creative Anachronism today, and looking back at past culture and trying to recreate it.
Well, he's a complicated guy. And there's no heroes, there's no good guys, and there's no bad guys. I tried to write this in the way that classic adult science fiction has always been written, nuanced. He's a great guy, but he's a murderer too. He's got a great faith, but then he loses it often. It's I left a lot for the imagination to the reader. There's religious tenets in it, but it's not particularly pro-Christian. Hindus and pagans and pantheists will see their side of things as they read the book too. It's not heavy-handed. There's nothing that is propagandistic about it, but there's a slight religionist tinge to it also. I don't want to ruin the end, but it's not purely atheistic. It's a story about what happens when a civilization becomes so scientifically advanced that it starts to impinge on the nature of nature itself and how the cosmos itself will react, dealing with a race of demigods that are starting to play with the very laws of physics.
It's interesting. You said it's not atheistic. I think one of the failings of some science fiction is that there's a tendency for writers to say, "Oh, we'll move past all that religious stuff in the future," as if humanity um, has always had this religious component. And I think it's more interesting to forecast into the future that religion will continue and how it might change and how it might shape future as well. So it's interesting that it does have some component of that. Why did you choose a Quebecois? I mean, do you have a connection to Quebec?
No, I'm in love with the maxims of Le Duc de Rochefoucauld, and if you read the book, you'll note that he's kind of a main character, even though he lived in the Sun King's time. Uh, uh, Enguerrand Dupree and his father and his family, he's the writer that they look up to, and they kind of they form their life after his maxims. And so I got to put some French in there. I'm interested in languages. I speak a few, and French is my weakest, but it exists a little bit anyway. And this was my chance to, Spanish. I'm great at Spanish. I read Latin. I speak English, obviously, but French I could certainly use a little help. But at least I can say that I got something published in French because there is some French laced throughout the entire work.
Well, Quebecois French is not the same as Parisian French.
I know that, but my French is terrible anyway, so I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know the difference.
Yeah, well, of course, I grew up in Canada and we study French automatically, but I can't say that I speak it by any means. I can read cereal boxes really well, but that's about
And
it.
from what I gather, they're kind of a tough-minded people. They stick to their guns, and I sort of infuse that into the character. And I don't want to keep repeating myself, but Canadians, especially, I hope, will like this book.
So you said it was, kind of a challenge to write. What was the process? What is the process for you? Do you do a detailed outline, and then was there a lot of stuff you had to research for this one? What was that all like?
Oh, this was tough. This was tough. This was very tough. I don't want to ruin. I don't want to spoil things, but there's some scientific uh, there's some scientific stuff in here that is very difficult. There's no hand waving involved, but what was required to make this plot go forward, it was an incredible explosion of technological expertise for a civilization 1,000 years in the future that is doing things that are beyond belief. And I didn't want to make it, the great failure in science fiction is people invent little gravity buttons, and the hero escapes through these ridiculous escape hatches. They call it hand wavium, and there is no hand wavium in Thinwalker. It's been thoroughly vetted, rewritten more times than I will ever admit. It took me far longer to write than I will also ever admit. It was turned down more times than I care to say. So the version that is the reader will see has been pretty well polished, and not through any help. Not I had no choice in it. It was through my editors and the facts that are involved with the plot. Very difficult stuff. There's some time travel involved that makes sense, that is plausible. One of the few ways to actually travel back and forth through time that probably very few readers will they'll be introduced to it in reading Thinwalker. Not nonsense, physically capable, but only with regards to a civilization maybe 1 million years old that has very much the fingerprints of God themselves on their hand.
So, did you? It sounds like you drew on a lot of expert opinion. Were you sharing bits with scientists in the field of, for example, nanotechnology and things like that, and getting feedback, or did you have a big group of researchers that were helping you out, or that you could talk to?
I actually I've got friends at NASA, at JPL, the Russian Academy of Science, the Andrea Pina Seismological Observatory in Italy, and in Japan and India. And I have actually run a few things by, especially on the hardest part. But I'm not going to mention their names because if things turn out wrong, if I got things wrong, I'm sure that I bungled a few things, and I don't want to. These are physics laureates that may not even want to be conflated with me in public.
Yes. So any errors are the authors and not the
Correct.
not the scientist that whose
And I'm
knowledge you
sure I
drew
made
on.
some errors. I'm sure I made some errors. It's fiction.
So yeah, when you have in any of your books, do you share them with people ahead of time? Like, do you have beta readers and a group of sort of writing focused people as opposed to the technical people that you draw on? I don't personally. I've never shared my work with anybody till it goes to an editor, but many authors I talk to are quite big on that. So I'm always curious.
I will admit something. I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to do it anyway. This book might have was read by every great senior editor, executive editor at every great uh, monster publishing house in New York, Toronto, and London, and sometimes, believe it or not, two or three times, and turned down. So,
Well, that's the story of many books.
and then fixed, and then sent back and fixed again. So this has gone through a meat grinder of the editor's uh, redlining before it was greenlighted more times than I could ever have imagined. If I'd have known it would have taken me this long to do it, I might not have started the project. This was a real task. So
Yeah, the
the
return
fin-
on investment starts to quickly drop the longer you put into a book. That's for sure.
but the finished product is uh, no thanks to me, but thanks to all the editors who turned it down. and requested that this was changed and I should have added that, and it would have been okay had I not done this. I took all their advice and rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it, and it's pretty polished now.
And the publisher is Skyhorse, is that correct?
No, Skyhorse was the last one.
Oh, right.
This is Stairway Press. I'm an independent, a small independent who is more literary fiction.
Interesting. And what kind of editing came from there? Once it's been through all these other people, but now you have the actual editor who's going to be producing the book, or their publishing house is going to be producing the book. What was that final round of editing like?
He did very little. He did good stuff, but it was so ready to go when he got it. He kind of fell in love with it, and it's a book that you can fall in love with. It's a great tale. I'm giving it short shrift. This the protagonist. He's something else. There's there's he's an unforgettable Quebecois that is diehard and murderous but wonderful, trustworthy but stab you in the back, and a love story to boot that just will not quit. Uh, it's 77,000 words long with not one expletive in the entire work, so you can share it with it's not something you'd be embarrassed to send to your grandmother or read to your grandchildren. Uh, there's no alien sex shower scenes, no nonsense like that. It's if there was I tried to write it like classic science fiction of the past, like Asimov and Robert Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke and all those great Hugo Award winners.
My
And,
era of reading when I
and
started reading.
in science fiction today, that's not the norm. That's the exclusion. There's a wave of really off-putting science fiction that has unfortunately become mainstream.
Yeah, there are certainly people writing more classic science fiction, and they're very popular, but they tend to be independently published or published through smaller publishing houses. No, I won't say that's. I mean, there is some of it from the and I've been published by Daw Books as my main publisher, and
Oh, they're huge.
I've had 12 novels with them, and
Oh my
I actually
goodness.
kind of write in that vein. And my last one was very much, you know, outer space adventure with a talking AI uplifted cat. So,
Wow,
so
12
that's
books.
the kind of
Wow.
stuff I like. But yeah, I do know what you mean, and but I think science fiction has fragmented in so many ways because of, and all publishing has, because there are so many ways to get books out there, that there are authors that I've never heard of who have vastly outsold me, even though I have a major New York publisher. So it's just a very different publishing world than it was once upon a time, for sure. So speaking of publishing, when did the book come out? It was out in print earlier, but it's just out in Kindle. Is that or an ebook? Is that what I understood?
Yeah, the paperback in December and the Kindle version is just out a few days ago. Yes, and it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere you want to be. I always think of the American Express ad when I hear that. So, have you been? I mean, it's been out for a little bit. Have you been pleased with the response you've gotten from readers?
Well, the reviews are going to be coming right up. You, for example, are one, and but there's several great newspapers and big
Oh, so
publishing
it's
venues that are reading it at this very moment, and they're planning reviews. So that's coming right up.
oh, okay. So you haven't had a lot of feedback yet from people outside the publishing circles.
You're going to be the first. So one venue in New Zealand, and then you.
And what are you working on now? Or you have something, another novel in the works?
I do. I do. It's done, and it's being read at this moment, and hopefully greenlighted very soon. It's science fiction, but taking place r- now in the very near future, not 100 light years from Earth, but in Los Angeles, and it's a weather war, earthquake, seismic forecasting book where it might not be science fiction. The United States, Russia, and China, since the last 20 years, have all been working on ways to engender man-made earthquakes to use as weapons. So this is a book taking place in Los Angeles with a seismic attack on Los Angeles, uh, artificially engendered by a terroristic power, and hopefully that's going to come out very soon. I should be getting a notice one way or the other within days or weeks.
So you, as noted, tons and tons and tons of nonfiction. And I often ask, and I started as a newspaper reporter and newspaper editor, and I've written more nonfiction than I have fiction. But I'm always interested in people who do both. If they find, like I do, that even though they are two different things, yet the experience of writing the one does benefit the other. So, all the nonfiction writing you've done, do you think that has helped you when it comes to writing fiction?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm a much better columnist than I am a fiction writer, probably. Even though people who disagree with me will hate my my nonfiction writing because I'm not liberal. I'm not super conservative. I'm kind of down in the middle. But nowadays, if you have even a moderate view on things, you can make enemies very quickly. I'm not a member of the far left lunatic fringe, nor the far right, but I've had my battles in public with so many people over so many controversial topics that it's kind of giving me cross swords in public with a great number of people, and that gives you a sort of that girds you for tough things that you need to do when you're writing fiction. Sticking to something and making it work and finding a way through.
Well, there's also the exposure to real human nature when you're like as a newspaper reporter and all that sort of thing. You just are exposed to so many people, and you talk to so many people with different viewpoints and different backgrounds and different hopes and dreams that I think that it helps with character development as well. Would you say that's true? That your nonfiction experience has helped you when it comes to building fictional characters?
You said that 20 times better than I could have. I'm gonna just leave it right there.
Yeah, I
You're a
have said that
well-spoken
occasionally.
fellow. You're very well spoken. I can see how you wrote 12 books. Daw turned mine down twice. Daw
Oh
read
well, the first one that they published of mine, they actually turned down, and then it came to them through a different channel, and that's how I broke in many years ago. Now that they've changed, they've been sold, and my editor has retired. So I'm working on something new right now, which my agent will then present to them. But that may have been my last novel for Dahl, the one that came out
No, you should be
last
very
year,
proud.
year
Daw
before.
is
But
huge. That's Penguin Putnam.
no, they were wonderful to work with. They were actually and they've now been bought by Astra Publishing, but they were basically a small company that was well, the Daw family, we called it, because it was Betsy Wollheim and Sheila Gilbert,
right.
and they were
I,
they were
I
both the editors and the publishers. So
I know. Well, I don't know her, but she's read She read both Pilots of Borealis and Thinwalker.
so there is still that big level of publishing, but then publishing through smaller companies like you've ended up doing this time, and I run my own small publishing company, Shadowpaw Press. Um, it does offer opportunities for stories that perhaps will never be able to find a home with a larger press, but you can still get them out there, and the publishing uh, mechanics are such that even a small publisher can put out, you know,
And have a big hit.
yeah, exactly.
I think.
Shadowpaw Press.
Excuse me.
It,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say Shadowpaw Press, for example, largely because I know him, has picked up the print rights for Robert J. Sawyer's next book, which is huge for me because it's me and the cat, right? So, but I'm playing in that sort of level once it comes to the authors that you publish and stuff. So how did you find the small publisher that you're with now?
You know what? I can't. I don't know how he came to pass, but it just our paths crossed. But back to what you said about small publishers. The Martian, started out
Yeah.
self-published. It wasn't even. It was sold for 99 cents on Amazon for forever until Random House picked it up and made it the giant success that it was, along with the film.
Yeah, and there are stories like that. So it certainly is a different publishing world.
I'm going to
Um,
have this. This is going to be seen by Hollywood producers also. I've got a couple that are lined up to take a look at it. So this hopefully might work out that way too.
you never know. So, what are you mentioned what you're working on fiction. What about on the nonfiction side? Do you have nonfiction work that's coming out? I mean, you're writing columns, but do you have any nonfiction books that you're working on at the moment?
My nonfiction days with earthquakes are at an end. I think I more or less made my point. I don't want to repeat myself forever. And as I said, the mantra has changed. The whole earthquake prediction is impossible stuff. That's a thing of the past. In Los Angeles, well, not just Los Angeles, any seismically active uh, region in the on the Earth, people have cell phones where you can link up and get a screaming warning of an earthquake prediction coming to your cell phone with EEW systems. Yeah, Mexico City, Tel Aviv, Bucharest, Istanbul. Uh, so earthquake prediction is a reality now. It's not that 20 seconds will matter. That's the sort of warning you would get. But for airports and hospitals and doctors getting ready to perform surgery, they're linked up to a system now with in any great city at risk seismically, where millions of people can get warnings that an earthquake is definitely on the way. And if you're looking for earthquake prediction, that is it, 100% foolproof in spades. So the idea of me trying to push the United States Geological Survey and all the others toward accepting that we're in the 21st century and that earthquake prediction is not impossible, that in an age where we've sent Voyager past the heliopause, and hearts are being uh, uh, replaced. This is a silly idea, and I've written 3 books to say that, and I think that's enough.
Well, as you said earlier, science fiction and science have kind of gone hand in hand over the years, and we are living in what was science fiction when I was a kid, for sure. Everything like what we're doing right now was science fiction when I was a kid. The this video calling and the what you have in your pocket with your iPhone is we really do live in a science fictional world. So I'm glad that earthquake prediction has perhaps moved out of science fiction and more into reality as well. I was
Well,
watching an anime movie recently, and part of the plot was these earthquake warnings coming over the cell phones for the characters. So
that's reality now.
yeah, exactly.
Every
Well,
big city on the West Coast has one.
and your main website is
Earth,
earthquakepredictions.com.
earthquakepredictors.com, www.earthquakepredictors.com,
Earthquake predictors.com.
earthquakepredictors.com, correct.
And are in other places online where people can keep up with your writing and what you're doing? Is
Yeah,
that another?
my Newsmax column is Shaking Up Science. My Times of Israel column is Tectonic Shifts. I have a big Facebook presence and on Twitter. My email address, if anybody wants to drop me a line, I have no problem with that. I'm at davidwrites100 at AOL.com. davidwrites100 at AOL.com.
Oh, I haven't heard an AOL.com address for a while.
Well, I've had it since forever, and there's no way I'm too connected like with everybody on it, so it's too late to change it.
Well, as long as it works. Well, David, thanks so much for being on the Worldshapers. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did too.
Very much. And again, it's a pleasure, especially to speak to Canadians. I hope Canadians will like this book,
I'm
especially
about as far from being a Quebecois as you can get, but I am Canadian, so
and I'm trying to work on my French. Hopefully, I'm glad you didn't say anything to me in French, but it is laced. The book has plenty of French in it, and I hope I didn't make too many mistakes.
I would not be the one to tell you, but I'm sure somebody will if you did. So
Thanks again.
thank you. So thanks again to David for that conversation. I enjoyed it, and I hope you did as well, and that you will check out David's book, Thinwalker. Just a few closing wrap-up things here to make sure that you know where you can find me and all of this stuff that I do online. You can find the Worldshapers, of course, here on YouTube, which is probably where you're watching this, or you might be watching it, may have gotten to it from the Worldshapers website, theworldshapers.com. All past episodes are there. All the audio-only ones. Some of them even have full transcripts, although I eventually gave up on that. But you can find all of them there. You can also find the Worldshapers on X, at the Worldshapers, and on Facebook at the Worldshapers. You can find me at edwardwillett.com. You can find me on X at ewillett. You can find me on Facebook at edward.willett. And you can find me on Instagram at edwardwillettauthor. And of course, you can find me on YouTube at Edward Willett. My publishing company, Shadowpaw Press, is shadowpawpress.com. You can find it on X at Shadowpaw Press. You can find it on Instagram at Shadowpaw Press. And you can find it on Facebook at Shadowpaw Press. And if you are interested in what Shadowpaw Press publishes, and I hope you are, please do go to the website. Check out many of the great books that we have out already. Again, I say we, and it's just me and the cat, but still. And the great books that are coming out. It's a very aggressive publishing schedule this year, and there are multiple genres represented, from historical fiction to literary short fiction to middle grade to, I even have a picture book coming up, to poetry, something for everyone. So please do check out shadowpawpress.com for the Shadowpaw Press titles, and they are available everywhere. Amazon, whatever bookstore you would like to get your books from, you should be able to order Shadowpaw Press titles. That's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. I hope that you will come back next week when I will be talking to Matthew Hughes. That's it for this time. Bye for now.